Hi, everyone. My name is Jill Sheehan, and I'm the founder and managing partner, along with Andrea Rogers Berry of Empire Charter Consultants. Thanks for joining us today. I'd like to introduce you to my friend, Aaron Brenner, Chief Executive Officer of Seton Education Partners, and how I knew him, founder and executive director of Briante Academy in Texas. Welcome, Aaron. I often start this by telling people how we met. I knew of you, and I think we had spoken, but I met you when we worked with you on Briante's application. And what an incredibly great experience. Texas taught me a lot of lessons I wish I had never learned, but they did. I learned a lot in Texas. So I'm excited, so excited to interview you today. I know you are on limited time, so I won't go on and on. I want to start with a question that I find important for me personally. Why is this work in the charter school space and education important to you?
Thank you, Jill. And I also always want to make sure that I thank you and Andrea for the partnership because literally we wouldn't have Briante were it not for our partnership with you. So we might
Don't you
weave that
cry
back
now.
in
We want to tell everyone a little bit about you.
during our
You've been with
conversation.
Seton.
Yeah. So this is my 30th year. I just finished my 30th year in the work. I know, right? I formally joined Seton in 2019, but I actually helped Scott Hamilton and Stephanie Soroki, now Stephanie Soroki de Garcia, with the original vision of Seton and then designing the Berea model and thinking through El Camino way back, 2009, 10, 11. So I was a friend, a partner, and an advisor, but I've been full time with Seton since 2019.
Wow, that doesn't even seem possible. So we work together. We know how the other one works. I never asked you why this work is important to you. Why is it?
Yeah, I'm a product of Greater Detroit. So I've lived in Texas 30 years. So in addition to being in education 30 years, I've been in the Lone Star State this entire time, thanks to Teach for America back in 1995, bringing me here. I think like many others, it started at home. My parents, my mom was a special education teacher. She taught the deaf and hearing impaired. Later on, when she went back to work professionally after raising myself and my brothers and teaching catechism and doing a lot of other things, of course, she ran an after school program and continued to really focus and invest in children and families that were pretty vulnerable, in her case, special education. And my dad was an attorney, but he did a lot of pro bono work in inside the inner city Detroit, Mississippi, Texas, Tennessee. He defended people on death row, pro bono, no cost, devoted a lot of his time, sometimes as much as 50% in a year. So I was just like really immersed in being aware of your surroundings, being aware of your community, being aware of the brothers and sisters who need extra support, as my parents would call them. And, they just guided me in many ways to pursue work that focused on partnering in the community. And in my case, I love telling stories. I love teaching. So the connection of that commitment to serving and loving community, and then being an educator, being an instructor, everything that comes with that, creating, incredible, innovative lesson plans with the guidance of others kind of came together. And I'm just really grateful to them, for instilling that in me. And I think that's really a huge reason for why I'm still in the work and why I still get up every morning excited to do what I do.
I love that. Thank you. You've been through some rigorous new application cycles. We've been through two of them with you in two different states. What lessons would you like to share about those experiences?
Yeah, I don't have as much experience as you, Jill. I think though that we probably shared this war story. I wrote charters, gosh, over 20 years ago in the state of Texas when, I was young and didn't know any better before I was even 30. And it was a totally different era. And so there was such a hunger at the state level and really a bipartisan or nonpartisan sort of hunger for new innovative school models to serve communities and in my case across Texas. And, during these last two go rounds with working with you and Empire and Andrea as partners, we're talking about Texas and we're talking about New Jersey. But even talking about Texas, which I think people sort of generally or stereotypically think of as this open state where, there's so much opportunity and sort of like little red tape and bureaucracy and gosh, the scrutiny that we went through in our process, and if you recall, just the amount of, attachments from a practical sort of time perspective that an application required. And, you would go to these initial sessions and I think there were more than 100 people that said, we're applying for a charter, back in that generation. And before you know it, the actual applications that were submitted were in the 30s. So you're already chipping away two-thirds. And then the state says, oh, over a third of these are incomplete. They chip that away. So you're down to about 20% of the original committed applicants. And then you go to the state, if you're invited after that initial interview. And, one thing that I'm incredibly indebted to you and Andrea and really have transferred this to other work is just being as prepared as possible. Like I remember practicing questions with you. I remember you bringing in, Dan as our board chair, who this is his first board chair experience. He's in his early 30s, so doesn't have the years and decades that you and I have. And just like immersing him in what could happen, like being prepared for the unexpected left field questions, both in our virtual interview during, COVID pandemic, of course, and then as helping us get ready and prepare for the live interview and testimonial, before the entire state board and people from the governor's office and the commissioner of education. And I mean, this is Dan West. Jill, and you remember him. This guy is
Love Dan.
a triple Harvard grad. He was a Marine. He served in Afghanistan and Somalia. And he pulled me aside that day before we had to go out there. And we were first because it was
Yep, I
alphabetical order,
remember.
B for Briante. And he said, Aaron, looked me right in the eye. I never forget this. And he said, I've never been this nervous in my life. And I was like, whoa, coming from this guy who I deeply admire, a couple decades younger than me, just because he was so nervous about just the detail. And, we had done all this preparation. Of course, he ended up being great. And again, I felt very prepared as well. And again, thanks to our partnership with y'all. And we were up there for over an hour
It was a
asking,
lifetime.
answering. Yeah,
It was a
yeah, you watched
lifetime.
it
We
live.
felt it.
Question.
I'm going to tell you a story at the end of this has something to go with it that you will find, I don't know, you'll find it interesting to find. I'm actually very emotional about the work. If I wanted to open a charter school, what advice would you give me?
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing question. I've been thinking about it. I think a few things. One is that, you know, think of really back to what I started with in terms of my own family and parents and upbringing, starting in, greater Detroit, is be aware and present in your community. What is your community need? And I know people talk about that. I really believe in that. And I sometimes fail. I really, though, try to hold myself to that standard. One of the things that we did at Briante, as you know intimately well, is we designed a two-way dual language immersion program as a school on the border, Mexico, US, Texas, and this idea of building bridges for children and families and community. And that's been a hallmark of our school, back to that original vision, the charter we wrote in partnership with you, everything involved. And so when you think if someone's saying, I want to write a charter, I've got a lot of crazy ideas. I could write probably 20 visions for school designs if somebody gave me a few hours and they locked the door and didn't let anybody call me. but are they really community aligned? Do they really represent, a connection and a support that the community intimately needs, and the community contributes to? Like, I get tired of sort of the deficit narrative of we're going to fill in something that the community lacks, which is different than, yes, a lot of the communities that charters have historically served have challenges, yet how are we going to build on the heritage and the strengths and the people and the history in a meaningful way? And as you know, one thing at Seton that I think is a hallmark, whether it's Bria in the Bronx or the school that y'all helped us get started in partnership with the team in Patterson or with Briante here in Mission, Texas, is we walk with parents as the first educators. And that's not just once you're approved. Like, I went and met countless families in the community. I talked to them about this original sort of community responsive vision, got feedback on that, heard things as simple as we absolutely need bus transportation, and a lot of charters in Texas were getting away from that. It's like, if our parents are asking for it, if they need it, because we have two working households, etc., we got to find a way, even though it's going to have a cost associated with it, to give them that. So, whether you're in New York City or South Texas or Florida or California or wherever you may be thinking about starting a charter, what do our neighborhoods, our community need? What am I uniquely suited and purpose to help contribute to that, and in partnership with the people that I'm serving? And I think if you can combine those elements, you can build in partnership with that community something that's not only special and innovative, it's enduring, and it's going to make a really lasting impact on the kids and families that we're all called to serve.
So today I had a call with a new applicant team, and they want to drop their charter somewhere of which they have no involvement in the community. And I was like, that is the big gap that new applicant teams miss. Get boots on the ground, know your community better than anyone else. Know it, because then you'll know the needs. People don't talk about that. They're like, we're going to replicate and we're going to drop an application here. We're going to replicate and we're going to do it here. Know the community. That
Amen.
is the number one piece of advice I too would give somebody. And that, and don't open it with your friends, because you won't be friends after the process. Those are my two big things. As we
Love it.
talk as a charter community about things we would like to change in the charter school movement, if you get to pick one thing you would like to change, what would it be?
Um, as you know, I was old school KIP, and I founded KIP's first elementary school, gosh, 23 years ago, so 2 decades plus. Um, and I think that the reason that Shine is that first KIP elementary school was very successful and inspired a lot of schools was the original vision was, we're going to be responsive to the community. We're going to be innovative. We're going to focus on starting the absolute best school we can. And we're going to serve children and families in a community like, sort of holding ourselves to a high standard like no one else has. Okay.
Right.
And it's like that drive, that perseverance, that push. And, I think a lot of networks get sort of caught up, and you alluded to that in your own reflection, which is, you know, replication because we believe in this model in this community, which I'm not against. I'm objectively not against that. I just think that if you go into it already thinking about where you're going to go next and what your scale is going to be and what your growth is going to be, that in a way it impedes you. Maybe it's subconscious. I've just seen this play out from leading and building that incredible community-based, innovative partnership school. And so, for people that have a school or two and, they're thinking about growth, again, I'm not against growth. I think that more kids, more families, more communities, need partnerships and need educators who truly are going to provide an innovative model in partnership with them. I just think that sometimes in the charter network, we've gotten so caught up with growth in some cases, we've become what we originally said we were hoping to, you
Yes.
know, honorably agitate, which is like the system. And so, it kind of defeats the purpose of having done the work in the first place. And I get why it happens. And you and I could probably write a book about it or have another conversation. It's just, I wish that, and in a way, people said, dude, you're 50. Why do you want to start a school like everybody else is consulting? I love my friends that are consultants, but I had that hunger to go back again and say, we've got to do something that's an individual entity of a school in partnership with a community. And it's going to be different than anything we've done before. And it is. And, obviously it's exhilarating to me personally. I just think that more and more people doing that and continuing to explore and push the limits of innovation and partnership with community can lead to models that we can't even imagine and is going to lead to impact that we can't even imagine. And I'm going to give one other quick shout out, sorry, to Uncommon Schools, where I've never worked at Uncommon. I have a lot of friends that have, from the CEO to chief of growth and operations, various great educators I've known over the years. And one thing I really respect about Uncommon, yes, they've grown, kind of focused on the Northeast, and then with the communities they live in and know and serve. And then on top of that, they really protected time, Jill, as you know, and space for great thinkers like Doug Lemov to capture their best practices and codify it. And they're having this ripple effect across the country and the world really as a result of that. And, as an individual school, I felt like we did that at Shine and worked with so many amazing leaders and entrepreneurs globally and nationally. Yet I just respect the fact that Uncommon saw a different way that a charter network could impact the greater good of education. And I think if more people studied that and thought about it, there's things that they could leverage from their own work that really could impact the greater good.
It's funny because I have often joked, Andrea and I often joke that funders did that. They were like, your model is so good here, you should open a school 5,000 miles away with an entirely different population and it'll be great. And it's not. And they don't think about what that should look like. And funders drove a lot of that conversation. Thank God for the funders. But the
Yes.
reality is, like, you have to figure out what works for your group in order to expand. What do you do better than anyone else? Where's your gap? Fill that gap, then consider replication. So I agree. So before I ask you if you have any questions for me, I want to tell you a story involves you and Dan. So one, I think we can both agree Andrea Rogers Barry is the greatest technical writer in the country. Hands
Amen.
down. She has, right? She has an incredible team. She has
Best.
Jessica and
Yeah.
Joe as editors. We have Wendy for data. Like, she is the best technical writer, hands down, in the country. And her rule of thumb is follow the directions, right? Like, she's very humble when you talk to her about her work. And then after you're done with the application, it gets handed off to me to prep. In your case, it was you and Dan for that meeting. And for days, I went back and watched every Texas Board of Education meeting. And I mean, easily 100 hours worth of meetings. And then you and Dan graciously gave me, I think, 90 minutes to 2 hours every other day for a while.
Yeah.
And I was just hitting you with questions and hitting you with questions. And then by the end, I remember thinking, they've got this, right? Like, there's nothing, and it's rare, right? We see Andrea's work, you get approved, right? Like, that application is so technically perfect, we see it. So it's more rare for me to see if I made an impact, even though I know I do, to see it living and breathing. So you guys go to the hearing. I'm watching it, Andrea's watching it. We have our earphones in. I'm in Florida, she's in New York, and I'm pacing while they're asking you questions. And Andrea would yell, I know you went over that with them. And this went on for nearly 2 hours. And at the end, as it was winding up, I started crying because it was like the most perfect interview. There was nothing you couldn't answer. It's nothing I taught you. It's, this is what they're looking for. This is how you answer it. Dan You, like, I knew assuredly you were going to be able to discuss any programmatic pieces. Dan answered all of those critical things that a board chair at that time should. And I was so overwhelmed with emotion watching, and I knew there was no way they were going to say no. So I start sobbing, and Andrea's like, "Oh my God, don't cry. They did a good job. You did good." And I was like, "No, I'm crying because they did so well." And so every time when I'm like struggling with work, I think back and I go, my work mattered in that. And it's
Yes.
rare because I know I can yell at people and be like, no, you should know this. But your team wanted to know everything. And it's rare for a team to say, run us through as hard as you can because we know they're going to come at us. But it's all the hours that you were willing to give to me to get there. And it was a beautiful, beautiful thing. I can't even explain to you how hard I cried at the end of it. I was like, not even consolable. Andrew's like, call me back when you're better. I was like, okay. It took like 2 days because it is rare to work with a team that says, hey, if we don't know the answer, that's on us. We got it. Like it's in our application. We have to go in knowing exactly what we promised to do because we have to live and breathe it. So I just want to tell you that that hearing was life to me. It was beautiful. And you and Dan were incredible. I remember Dan telling me at one point, he's like, wow, you're like really hard. And I was like, I am. Right. And I knew he appreciated it though. Like he
Yes.
didn't say it in a bad way. He was
No.
like, I feel like I had to study before I meet with you. And I was like, you do. Yes. So thank you for that. Like it reinforced the work I do. We see Andrea's work. It's tangible.
Yeah.
Rarely do you see my work. So I saw it on that day and it was beautiful. So thank you for that.
No, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. That's great. I mean, I probably could have predicted some of that just because we work so closely together, but just to hear it and, here we are and, we're gonna have 445 kids at Briante tomorrow for the first day of school for 25, 26.
Don't
And
make me cry again. I'm
yeah, and
very emotional. When I talk about your schools, I get very, very emotional. Like we work really hard for your schools.
I
Monsignor
know.
Dino, by the way, is still my favorite. I still talk about him. He's hilarious. Any
In
questions?
his own way, he really appreciated your preparation. He
He
told me
on
that.
it? Listen,
Yeah.
he did. He sent other people to me. So I know Monsignor liked me. Any questions for me, Aaron?
I mean, I think you kind of alluded to this, Jill. I'd love to know, when I have peers who have been in the work for decades, as you and I have, like what, in a way you just gave a testimonial. I'd love to know though, sort of beyond that, like what keeps you in the work? Because there's other things that I'm sure you could be doing with your time, and yet you're still committed, you're still passionate about it. Like why so long in this work?
So I think I've said this before. I grew up not wealthy, lower income. Went to a school in high school where they told me my guidance counselor, I'll never forget her as long as I live, where she told me my parents had too many kids and I probably wouldn't be able to go to college. So all my courses were kind of just handed it to me and that lower expectation. I had this conversation actually with Stephanie recently, and what I became was a pregnant 19-year-old. And I remember when I found out I was pregnant, I thought, oh, I became exactly what they thought I would become. And I knew I was smart and I was a hard worker. And then after the birth of that child, I'm like, I want to do something that makes a difference. And I worked for a Senate Majority Leader, a senator, the inspector general. But when charter schools started, it made me, in New York, I thought, what difference would it have made if I had a school that believed I could accomplish anything, regardless of how much money my parents made? And so, what keeps me in it is we still have schools, traditional district schools, that discount kids because of the socioeconomics behind it. And There are times when I do want to leave, and like DMV is always hiring around me. I can go work at motor vehicles and be great with that. Uh, so what keeps me in it is we made a promise to families and students, and we still haven't fulfilled that promise. So they're going to have to cart me out of the charter school movement. I will say the question I get more than any other is when am I going to retire? And the answer to that is when I force all the rest of the people who aren't helping kids out of the movement. So I'll be here for a long time. That's
I
what
love
keeps
that.
me in it. I believe in it. We
Yeah.
promise to do better. What a difference, right? A school like that
Yeah.
could have done for me and my siblings. I have 7 siblings. What
Wow.
a difference somebody believing in you could truly make. And you don't really
Yeah.
know those scars of childhood until you have a child and you're like, my child
Yeah.
is never going to go through the same system of education that I did.
Yeah.
And you know, as a parent, you pay very close attention to how your school treats your kids. I paid
Oh
attention,
yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I made a promise. I am in it for the long haul. There will be a day where I'm just like, okay, I've had enough and I'm too old to continue. But for now, I'm in this fight. Charter schools deserve to be here. Kids deserve a better education. Families deserve better. And until we fulfill that, I'm right here.
Yeah. Yeah. Promises to children are sacred. I love
They
that.
sure are.